Hi, and welcome to this edition of Tech Clarity TV. I'm Michelle Boucher, Vice President of Engineering Software Research at Tech Clarity, where we make the business value of technology clear. Today I'd like to talk to you about simulation bottlenecks and give you some ideas about how you can get even more value from your simulation tools. I'm going to share with you some highlights from some research that we did recently titled Addressing the Bottlenecks of FEA Simulation, Enabling Innovation by Getting Even More Value from CAE. This report is based on a survey that we ran, and we looked at some of the top areas that slow down simulation. And then we also identified top performing companies, and we looked at how they overcome these bottlenecks, as well as what they look for in a simulation solution and what they look for in a simulation vendor. We had 160 manufacturers participate, and they came from a variety of different industries. We also had very good global representation in our study. And then finally, we had good distribution of different company sizes. In our analysis, we also identified top performing companies. It was really important to identify top performing companies because you can understand what are the types of things that they're doing differently that their competitors aren't. And you can see the metrics that we used as well as the different averages for the two different groups. So we asked companies, what's driving your investments in your design process? And you can see the top answers in this graph. What's really interesting is there just isn't a dominant goal. To be competitive, companies need to focus on quality, efficiency, cost, and innovation. And it's no longer enough just to focus on one. You need to be good at all of these things, and it's a real balancing act. Simulation can give you that insight to help you really understand the impact of different design parameters. The more insight you can get from simulation, the better. Unfortunately, there's several different bottlenecks within the simulation process that can really slow you down. And because of that, you'll get less value from your simulation tools. So the rest of our study focused on identifying exactly those bottlenecks and then looking at best ways to overcome them. So when you first look at simulation, there's actually several different phases involved. There's pre-processing, which is the process of setting up the analysis. And then you send it to the solver, and the solver runs all the numerical calculations and computations. And then the post-processing phase is looking at the results and analyzing them. So this graph shows the breakdown of simulation time. So let's first take a look at pre-processing to really understand why it's such a time-consuming phase. This graph shows the different pre-processing tasks that are involved and the percent of pre-processing time that each takes. And you can see that a third of the time is spent just cleaning up CAD geometry, and then another third is spent on meshing the model. So the paper digs into these areas much more deeply and really examines all the different challenges involved. I'm going to touch on just a couple of examples just to give you an idea of the types of issues you should be thinking about. So as I mentioned, cleaning up CAD geometry is one of the bigger bottlenecks of pre-processing. Just to save time, usually a simulation starts with an existing CAD model, but you need to bring that CAD model from the design tool into the simulation tool, and that involves a translation. And just as if you were to use an online translator to go from Spanish to English, the translation's not always perfect. And you can see an example of what happens in this model. You can see a very tiny surface highlighted. And what's happened there is the surface wasn't calculated exactly right in the translation and created a very small sliver. So what needs to happen is you need to identify all these little tiny areas and fill them in and merge it with the rest of the model. And if you don't do that, the model's not going to mesh correctly. Another area is defeaturing. Just to save the amount of time to process and process the results, models are usually simplified. And what that means is removing features that aren't really going to have much of an impact on the product performance. So an example of that is in this model. You can see this very small hole. It's not going to have much of an impact on the performance or the strength, so you can remove it. If we were to leave it in the model, the mesh for the analysis would need to go all the way around it and create far more elements and require far more calculations. But by removing it, you can see that the mesh is far cleaner and it's going to be much faster to process. The challenge is identifying all the different features that you can remove. It takes up time, but then also if you remove too many, you might simplify your model to the point that your results aren't going to be accurate. In our study, we found that top-performing companies are far more likely to automate a lot of these tedious, time-consuming processes so that they're far less of a bottleneck for them. So let's take a look at post-processing. In this graph, you can see the different tasks involved with post-processing and the percent of post-processing time that's spent on each. So we found that a lot of the challenges associated with post-processing really come down to the sheer volume of data that you have to work with. And we found that top-performing companies are much more likely to have tools in place that allow them to quickly sift through the results and very quickly identify problem areas so they can start to take action on those results. So that was a quick overview of our study findings. I'd like to leave you with just a few key takeaways. The first is invest in your product development processes. And this really represents a great opportunity to help you differentiate your products. And then use simulation tools to help you with that. To get even more value from simulation, look for tools that have ways to automate a lot of those pre-processing tasks. And finally, use post-processing tools that allow you to work with, analyze, review, and share your results. That allow you to process the analysis that much more quickly. So I hope you found this short presentation very helpful. I thank you for your time and attention. I'd love to continue the conversation. You can reach me on our website, our blog, Twitter, or Facebook. I'd also like to invite you to download the paper. It's available at no cost and goes far more deeply into many of the best practices that you can adopt at your company. Thank you again.